Welcome, everyone. This is Juan Soto, Microsoft AccessUserGroups.org and the chapter president of Microsoft Access with SQL Server from AccessUserGroups.org. I'm also the founding member of the AccessUserGroups.org website. It's my pleasure to have you guys here. Thank you so much for joining us. I am this is night 2 of our 4-night sprint on Microsoft Access with SQL Server Academy. Last month, we did the introduction of Microsoft Access with SQL Server Academy, where we talked about how to optimize access with SQL Server, some of the pitfalls involved, how to avoid getting drawn into poor performance issues, how using the drivers are the right drivers is half the battle, and making sure that the performance is better. And I'd like to thank George Hepworth, who has just uploaded that month's meeting. So George, if you can put the link here, the meeting, that'd be great. And you guys can check that out. If you did not come to that meeting, no worries. We record these, so please go back and look at it. We have some good nuggets there. And today we don't have a PowerPoint. Today we're going to be going through the progression of migrating Access database to SQL Server. So as part of your homework, I asked you to install 3 things. I asked you to install SQL Server Migration Assistant for Access, SQL Server Management Studio, Developer Edition, and of course you need Microsoft Access in order to create the Northwind database. So I'm going to do the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Microsoft Access program, and Northwind is the standard template here. So I'm going to click on Northwind to create a new copy of Northwind. And so I double click on it and ask me for a file name. That's okay. One of the things that's going to say is enable content. Now I don't care about the content. I'm not going into the form design. All I care about is the data. So if I come in here, you'll see that we've got this customer interface. Now, when you see stuff like this, customers, orders, inventory, I kind of like it, but it goes to the trouble of creating these groups. If you ever wonder how Northwind does that, you can right click on an open trader and click on navigation options. And you'll notice that under tables and related views, somebody went through the trouble of creating employees, shoppers, shippers, customers, and so forth, and associated tables and queries and reports under each group. And I kind of like it. Not everybody goes through that, mostly because professional access developer will never show the database window, right? And the navigation pane. And so more like an internal use. So I'll probably have like a one custom group. These are objects that frequently go to. There's always, in every application, right, there's always that form or table you're constantly bringing up. And so I like to have it towards the top. And so what I'll do is I'll create a custom order group here. But if you want to see everything normally, you would come here and you would click on the item type. And now you got that standard view, right? And here in tables, you'll notice I've got these tables. The nice thing about Northwind, there's already data in here. Lots of data that we can go through, order details, orders, and queries and forms and so forth. So this is a great way to test and play around with SQL Server migration. I'm going to ask you guys to mute your microphone. Thank you very much. And that way I hear some typing in the background. So I appreciate if you can mute yourself. Thank you. All right, so now I've created my Northwind database. It's called Database 1, probably not the most intuitive. Let me get out of the way. Database 1, and where did it save it? I just want to make sure I say it right. So the documents Database 1, Accdb. All right, now that I know where that is, I'm going to close Access. I'm going to come in here to SQL Server Migration Assistant. Now, before you get started, I'm going to give you golden nugget number 1. Go into it. If you've never used SQL Server Migration Assistant, you want to go to the tools menu here, and you want to click on default project settings, right? Golden nugget number 1. And then you want to pick the targeted version. I just do 2019. And here I'm going to go to type mapping. Now, 99.99% of what SQL Server Migration Assistant I don't like to change, but there's a couple of things that I like to change right off the bat. Number 1 is that I like to change it from varchar right here, text right here to varchar, right? And it will pick mvarchar. Now, mvarchar uses more memory in SQL Server. So if yours says mbar-char, you want to click on edit here and change it to varchar. So this is where usually you would see mbar-char. The reason why is because mbar-char is good for foreign languages. So if you need your database is going to be outside the US and other than English, you will need mbar-char. So you like that, but I make that change, and that's the only change I make there. SQL Server Migration System. Now, normally you would start with the wizard. The wizard's fine. I'm just going to do it this way because I just like doing it this way. So I'm going to click on New Project. I'm going to name this New Project. So I'm going to call this SQL Server. SQL Server, and I just put stuff over my keyboard. Hold on a second here. Minor emergency keyboard here. And give me a second. I am prepared with a towel at hand. Yes, I hope I don't ruin this keyboard. It's a really nice mechanical keyboard that's some money on it. And it lights up, as you can see here, it lights up in orange for Halloween. Okay. All right, so we're going to see where I'm board. Where was I? Oh, yes. New project. All right, so I'm going to come in here, the file menu, new project. Call it SQL Server. SQL Server. It doesn't matter what you want to do it. I call it SQL Server Academy. View. Not when. You want to save your project, and I'll tell you why, because I'm going to demonstrate why it's necessary for you to change your project so that it makes your life a lot easier through the life of your project, right? It makes it much easier to manage your project. When I get hired to do a project, I always start a SQL Server Migration Assistant, and I use it when I do beta upload, alpha upload, beta upload, and final production. But we'll be talking about that later on the time. All right. So now I've created my project. I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Databases here. Now, in the old days, you had to install a 2010 database engine to get this to work because 365 had this wall around the Jet engine, and so you have to install the Access database component. You don't do that anymore. But I added my database. Obviously, this one doesn't have a workgroup file, so I don't have to worry about security. And you know that you've been able to link your project well because it will show you the tables here. So if I click on the plus sign there, I'm on my tables, right? So I'm gonna click on that, right? So I got that out of the way. Now I need to connect to SQL Server. So I got SQL Server installed locally. If you don't know your server name, which if you never used SQL Server before, it's going to be difficult. So I'm going to launch SQL Server Migration Assistant here. This is your server name. In my case, it's my desktop dash for ETV, right? And the server port I just pick default, and I am going to create a new Access database, SQL Server database for this. And let me just break that now. I'm going to go back to SQL Server, and I'll show you how to do this. So you're going to right click on databases, new database. And then we're going to call it Northwind. Northwind Academy Part 2. And I'm not going to put any spaces in there because that's going to make my queries more harder to do down the road. So no spaces. Okay, I'll set the defaults. Now, like I told you the first month, I'm not a SQL Server expert. I'm an expert in Access with SQL Server. So I created my shell of a database. There's nothing there. All it is just Northwind Academy 2. I'm going to come back here. I may have to cancel and restart in order to see the database. I'll do that right now rather than wing it. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to pick the, still need to do this. I may have to access the program altogether. Let's see how I can change it. I'll just copy it. Right? So I'm going to say, okay, that one is called Northwind Academy P2. So I'll just type in Northwind Academy P2. All right. Now, Windows Authentication is fine, and that's what I like to use in my projects. Versus SQL Server Authentication, there is Active Directory and integrated Azure Active Directory. And this is the same tool, by the way, that you would use to upload to Azure. So if you ever have a project where you need to use the Azure SQL service, you would use this tool, excuse me. Because it makes it slow down easy. When will you use SQL Server Authentication, right? You got hired by a major customer that's using Active Directory already in enterprise, and they want to leverage the infrastructure they created so that they can maximize, right? So when I disable somebody in Active Directory, they'll automatically disable the application and access, and also SQL Server. But if you have, for example, a client hired you, and we've been hired, for example, to do apps for a franchise system in the US. They have franchisees throughout the US, and they're all using the same database and the same tables. We just separate them using views so that one franchisee can't see the other franchisee's data. Well, those are SQL Server logins because there is no overreaching Active Directory, right? So Subway would call me and say, hey, these are not our employees, these are franchisees. We're not going to give them logins to the network, Subway network, internal network. We'll just use SQL Server Authentication, right? So that's a great example where you use SQL Server Authentication for that, which is Windows Authentication. I'll click on Connect. Great. Okay. Now, so here's my SQL Server database, and databases here, and I can see all my databases, and I'm going to obviously migrate my data off Point Academy too. Now, this does a lot, right? Like for example, I can do I can have it do an analysis of what would it take to migrate this, right? So I can create a report. It'll go through and analyze the database, analyze the indexes, and so forth. And sometimes you need to do that, right? Some projects are pretty straightforward. Sometimes they're really complex. You want to analyze and see what it is. I'm gonna click on OK for that, and I get this nice little report that shows me some issues, right? Where I say, okay, this database data type is not supported. Estimated manual conversion time 3 hours. So I look at this and I come in here, shippers, attachments. Now, what is this? This is the attachment data type field, which I don't recommend you use in Access, but it is what it is, where you can upload files to your Access database, which is a terrible idea because Access files are going to bloat your database. It's going to take very little time to get 2 gigabytes if it's any meaningful number of files. So I don't recommend you use attachments, right? And attachment data type. I do use SQL Server to store documents, and we'll talk about that later in the course. But this is going to be an issue, so I need to fix that. So I got warnings here, 230 warnings. Primary key column is nullable. It tells you how many hours it is. I don't know how many hours would take a regular person to fix this issue, because I can just probably go in there and delete the nullable, any null values, my primary key, and then make it non-nullable. But it tells me the primary key. It tells me the table, order status, inventory transaction. This is a warning, not an error, so it'll overcome these issues. And then you got the information here and so forth. So this is a nice little report. The number one thing is the attachment field in the shippers, products, employees, customers, and products. Let's try the migration without removing that field, see what happens, right? So if I go into shippers and I look at the structure of shippers, so I'm going to go into shippers here. And I don't see any information here regarding fields and all that. So I would, let me see if I can just click here. And I can look at the attachment. All right, so it's called attachments here. And it's nullable. And it's we'll see how it handles it. If not, then we'll need to strip that attachment field out of the table and do the conversion again. Now, there are several gotchas when it comes, nugget number 2 of the night. There are several gotchas that you have to look out for when you migrate a new Access database to SQL Server. One of the biggest ones is, and if you don't use the SQL Server migration system, you do this some other way, is the bit field, the yes/no field in Access where an access table will have a field data type of yes, no. And there is no yes, no data type in SQL Server. It's called the bit field, bit, which is 0 or 1. So most access developers, myself included, we use that. And SQL Server Migration Assistant knows that and will convert it for you. But the gotcha there is if you don't default the value to 0, in other words, when I create new records in SQL Server, the new record should default to 0. That'll cause a problem. It's a known bug with Microsoft Access. So the migration assistant is going to convert that bit field over, the yes no field, excuse me, the bit. It's going to default it to 0. And then it'll automatically take care of. So I kind of like that. I know I don't have to worry about these gotchas. It's all handled by the migration assistant. And I will show you how that looks once we go with a migration, once I find a table that does that. All right, so that's the report. It gives you an analysis. I am ready now for the main events. So I'm going to right click on this database. And there's several options. There's convert schema, there's convert, load, and migrate. So convert schema will, I never tried that, but I mentioned it just creates a table server. Convert, load, and migrate is what I use, right? And I can even use it to link tables to my front end, which is great. Refresh from the database, we're going to talk about how that works later on this evening. So I'm going to click on convert, load, and migrate. It's going to analyze again, so it doesn't store those results. And it's going to go through and does the 6 errors, which we know about, the attachment field, okay? Now, it gives you this little intermediary. Obviously, there's no tables in the database. So over here on the left-hand side, it'll say not found, right? None of these tables exist. Now, notice that I only checked off tables. I did not check off queries. If you check out the queries, it's going to create views for you where it can. If it can't create a view, if it can't create a view, view is what SQL Server calls a query, right? It'll bypass that query. Now, the reason that I don't do queries is I don't want to blow my database in SQL Server with every single little query into a view, right? My philosophy is I just do the tables, and then I look at which queries need views, and I'll just create them. I'm going to click on OK. And now it's converting those objects into SQL Server. Found 0 errors doing that. Now it's migrating your data. Now, if you have a large access database with lots of data, that can take a little bit, right? It's going to take a little bit to upload, right? So you have a huge database. All right, so that's done, right? And I can see there's a report. So if I click on a report here, this is probably the same, almost the exact same report. Now, converted 97.91 from that. That's a big problem, right? Obviously, if you migrate records, you want it to be all 100%. So you need to investigate why it didn't convert to 100 records, because you're not going to go back to your customer and say, well, good news, I got above 90%. What do you mean you got above 100%? Well, I didn't convert some orders. I mean, they're not going to like to hear that, right? We need to migrate all the data. So obviously, I would need to dig deeper into here as to why, and the data that been supported. So I would wager that the records that were not converted are those records that had attachments to it, right? And that's why those records did not have them, did not convert over. So if I were to do a filter on that table for the attachment field, I bet you I got 6 records there that have attachments to it. That's how I handle those attachment field, not the rest way. What you need to do in that case is you need to create another version of your Access backend, exclude the attachment field, upload the data, and that way you'll get 100% conversion, not 97.9, like in my case. And then figure out how to do those files later on. Maybe you create a network folder in the network and link to them in SQL Server. Maybe you create use a data type field so you can store those files in SQL Server and then import it with ADODB. Wherever that may be, you need to make sure you get 100% of the records because it's 97.91%. Great, so I'm gonna click on close. Now, if I go to SQL Server and I refresh my database here, I'm gonna click on refresh. And I look at the data, and now I see my tables. I got my tables in there, and they have their data. Now, The SQL Server migration system can create primary keys when there's a primary key that was lacking on the Access database. Now, I usually, like I mentioned the first month, right? The last month I said, you gotta correct any issues with the Access database first before you migrate to Access Server. That means primary keys are missing, foreign keys that are needed, create all those. Don't expect SQL Server migrations to do it for. However, the SQL Server migrations can create indexes for you, and I believe those are in the settings. So if I go into tools and default project settings, I click on go to migration. I have to dig for this. Data context correction, do nothing. Data correction, slang minus, check the strings, free fire triggers, keep identity, null, stable line. Virus, enable. Oh, here, add primary key now. So if you switch this to yes, it'll actually create those primary keys for you. Bad idea, because it's going to create primary keys. It's going to give it any name it likes, and rather as opposed to you having to do those primary keys for you. Another thing that I like about the migrations is it automatically adds timestamp count. So let's take a look at that next. That's golden nugget number 3, where timestamp is a special kind of SQL Server data type. You don't use in your queries. When you look at the data, it doesn't show, it's gibberish. You just don't do it. But it's crucial if you want to maintain a multi-user environment and access, that every one of your tables have a timestamp field. There are very limited situations where you don't use timestamp. Armin Stein, another Access MVP, has a great blog article on that. Go take a look at that article. But I always use timestamp field. So here it is. Timestamp field here. So the original table does not have it. And what that is used by Access to determine if a record is changed. So say, for example, you and me are in the application, and I'm working on an order, and you're working maybe on the same order or a different order. Access needs to know if that record has been changed and use the timestamp field to see if that record has changed in order to improve the data integrity of the application. Otherwise, you're going to start running into problems. Always include the timestamp field. From my standpoint, always include that. All right. So great. I did my migration, right? So I did migration. What's the next step? Well, the next step is from my app, link it back to the app, right? So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go the lazy route. I'm going to link my tables. So it's going to link those tables to the Access database. And, you know, I use Windows Authentication. Server SPN. Let's see, we'll go with that. I never do it this way. I always go with DSL-less technology. There is a blog post on the Microsoft website, not a blog post, an article, how to do DSL-less connection. So why do we want to go DSL-less? Because it's a pain to go to every workstation in the company and create that DSN, or a new workstation comes on board and you have to make references to create DSN. But DSL-less is one less step that you have to do. All you have to worry about installing the drivers, and you don't have to worry about installing DSN. So we don't use DSNs at all. There's nothing wrong with them. It's not going to slow your performance. I just don't do it. All right, so it's going through there. Obviously, it's creating these links. You can't have the Access database open while it's doing this. So it's going through that. We'll take a look at the database once it's completed and see how I created this. This is the first time I actually do this. I decided this year to be more, to expand the academy to 4 or even 5 nights, because I felt that the subject matter required more time, right? It's just something I wanted to do. And so one of the things is we're exploring these options. Well, that's working. I want to talk about what normally happens, right? The next step would be we make sure that the data can be opened in the front end, and then we look for our queries, which we'll be doing there next. If any queries particularly slow and how to optimize that. And then once we're ready, we go straight to beta. So we'll give the customer a beta version for the database. Here's the beta version of the database. Test it out. Let us know if you have any issues with it. Basically, it's the same access database that they're used to seeing, but it's highly optimized for SQL Server. And so we asked them to go through there and then look through and let them report back. We use Monday.com to report bugs. They just love the platform. And so they'll get an email address with the project at itimpact.com, and then they'll report bugs to that email address. It creates a bug report in Monday.com, and then you do that. But here's the reverse to rub. When you may get this file from the customer, and you may be working on this for 2 weeks, for example, and then you're ready for the beta. Well, you don't want to give the beta to them with 2-week-old data, right? They want to be able to pull up their current production system in Access and then compare that with the new version you just gave them in SQL Server, and they want to see the same order they entered that day in the old version and the new version, and run reports and compare and make sure reports are accurate, right? They want to do all that. So we will cover that in a second here, how to out the data. So right now I'm going to save my project, and I'm going to include the metadata and save that. All right. I'm going to close the SQL Server Migration Assistant, and I'm going to launch Access. Here's golden nugget number 4. I don't like switching with Alt-Tab so much. I mean, I'm a multitasker, right? I got my email, I got my Teams, all that. So I'm going to press the Window key and Tab. When I do that, you guys confirm you see these 4 desktops. Let me know in the comments. I have 4 desktops here, right? My second desktop has calendar, so I did Window Tab. I do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here. I'm going to move to my SQL Server Migration System desktop number 2. And I'm going to put back in desktop number 1. So I'm back in desktop number 1. Why did I do that? Well, because sometimes when obviously if I do Alt-Tab now, it's gone right. It's gone here because I'm desktop 2. But sometimes Alt-Tab doesn't work. And rather than me searching through all the 1,000 windows I have, I just go four finger swipe on my mouse. I have a trackpad instead of a mouse. I go 4 finger swipes, and there's my SQL Server Migration Assistant. I work here. I go 4 finger back, and I do that. If you want to see what I have here, let me show it to you. Let's see. I have this really neat trackpad I brought on Amazon. Let's see if I can. It's just a trackpad. There's nothing special about it. Let me see if I can. There you go. There you go. It's a trackpad. And if you're interested, I can give you the link. I won't make any money on it. I used to have like a reseller account on Amazon. But this nice thing, if you don't have a trackpad, you can press Alt-Tab. Window Tab, not Alt-Tab. Window Tab goes to your desktop 2. That kind of defeats the purpose of productivity. Or you can hold Control Window left to go back to desktop 1, Control Window right for desktop 2, Control Window again for desktop 3, and finally I can do desktop 4. So I can have 20 desktops, believe it or not. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't consume a lot of memory. And so it's just a convenient way for me to go back between that 2. All right, so let me go ahead and pull up the Northwind database. I'm going to click on Access here. Bring that up. Database 1. Okay. And here are my tables. Now, notice that it took the old tables, renamed it. Obviously, you don't want to have the same table. You don't want the data still there. So, for example, there is a customer version of the old data here, which is convenient if I want to check any data and check issues on my system, my having. So, and these still work. I open them up, and then now I have SQL Server version here, right? If you hover over these, you see it's using ODBC driver 13 for SQL Server instead of the 17 version. So I'm not sure why I do 17. That's another problem having SQL Server Migration System for these links for you. It's not using the latest driver. But it's not using DSM, which is kind of cool. And so, so if you hover, there's a lot of information. And later on in the course, we'll show you how to leverage this information to create pass-through queries really easily. All right, so I got my queries, my customer queries. I got my tables in there. Everything looks great. Next step is I want to check the query performance. So I'm going to go over here and after type, I'm going to switch to queries. And I like going through all my queries there, select queries, to see if there's any issues with performance, right? Now, a word of caution regarding performance. So I'm just going to start going through these, and I don't see any issues now. Word of caution, that one took a little bit longer. But we do a lot of work with Azure. where customers hire us and, hey, we want to move our backend to Azure, right? It's almost 90% of what we do is that. And so the problem with that is you got to deal with the latency, like I mentioned last month. So when it's not the same having a SQL Server on the local network it is having a SQL Server on the cloud. And so what might take almost instantaneous here, you might see a lag 1 or 2 seconds, right? You start seeing a lag because it's just in the cloud, right? And it's just not the same as having a local SQL Server. So we try to keep it into the actual customers, our standard is 2 to 3 second range, right? 1001, 1002, 1003. And my query results show up. So people are willing to wait 3 seconds because number one, they realize it's the cloud. Number two, a complex web page takes around 3 seconds to load, right? So they kind of, anything beyond that, you're going to start having problems. So there was one particular instance, I always make this example, where there was one particular instance where a developer came up to me and said, hey, Juan, this query is taking me 45 seconds to go, right? And, actually, we have more recent project. Here, check this out. We have a project we just worked on for a company in Canada. And the developer came to me and says, wow, this query is taking 4 minutes. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see what the client says. The client loved it. He's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you got that to work. It always times out for me. Even when an Access backend on her local network, that database was poorly designed. And so it was just timed out and it would take forever or it would take forever. So she was thrilled. It took 4 minutes and told her, look, we can probably get this down to a few seconds. Oh, yeah, no, that's okay. Let's move on. Yeah, and so anyway, so these queries do look like they ran good. But if they don't, I'm going to close all of these. But if they don't, now you need to go to the second step, which is create a view. Okay? So when do you create a view? Well, when you want to optimize, right? If you have a query that's got a lot of, I don't know, lots of tables like this. Look at this spaghetti here. All right. This in the cloud, I'll tell you right now, will convert to a view. When I see stuff like this, I may go to view. Number one. Number two, please don't name your primary keys ID like Microsoft did from our point. This is a big beef. Trust me, and George is my witness. We told Microsoft about these issues with Northwind. One of them is they use ID in all these tables. And for years, we've been trying to get them to not do that. So can you modify? Heck, I won't even redesign Northwind and give it to you, right? Because Northwind is used so much to teach people how to design access tables. When they see this bad stuff here, where almost every primary key is ID, it just looks bad on us. That's number one. Number two, notice that there's spaces in the field names. That's just going to make your queries more a pain because now you have to surround the fields in brackets. So if I go into SQL View here, you notice that order ID's got brackets around it. Well, who wants to start typing brackets when you want to do a T-SQL call, right? Nobody does. So, I mean, if you don't want to use brackets, then freaking don't use spaces in your field names. And on it goes. And trust me, when I say this, we tried and failed to get them to update Northwind because we'll let you in a little secret. But promise me you won't tell anybody. The Access team has no control over that file. It's controlled by another group altogether at Microsoft. So if you work out to the Access team, they would love to modify its template, but yeah, the little kingdoms over there in Microsoft and that's controlled by another group. Anyway, I'm not going to start getting into the internal politics of Microsoft, but this is a good view. All right, so here's the thing. We want to take this. First attempt is we want to copy this code, right? So I'm going to right-click copy. And I'm going to go to SQL Server Migration, SQL Server Management Studio to create the view. Where's my SQL Server Management Studio? Desktop number 2. Here we go. Desktop number 2. Go to number 5. Control N is your friend. Control N is Nancy. All right. So you want to make sure you're in the database, and this database is showing here at the top. I have multiple databases on this. The last thing you want to do is create and paste your query here, and then start all the squiggly lines. Because if I don't have the right database, here's how it's going to look. Right. So if I come in here, it's gonna say, oh well, we can't find this data. We can't, of course, because I'm the wrong database. So let me go back to the right database. For the character. All right. So I am going to execute this off the bat, and NZ is not supported. So this is your first issue, right? Especially when you're new with SQL Server. I know what the functionality do. I use it as no, but there is a great tool at your disposal that we created as an organization, SQL Server AccessUserGroups, and that's called the Sql Converter. So I'm going to go to AccessUserGroups.org, and I'm going to paste that same query there, because here's the problem. SQL Server uses what's called T-SQL. You know, SQL is an international standard. Every vendor has its variations, right? So Microsoft calls it T-SQL, Oracle calls it something else. If anybody knows what Oracle calls it, let me know in the comments here. And then I'm going to go to SQL Converter, right? This is something you should have up and running. I use this constantly when I'm working on the project. So always have this browser up here, not to toot my own horn, but here I'm going to paste that Access SQL. And now I'm going to click on Convert to get this nice little message. And do inside for next minute, Access specific. This occurred October 7th. And now you have the equivalent here. Now, this is not 100% foolproof, right? So more into the why. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to click on the copy button. I'm going to go back to manage menu. I'm going to press Control A, the delete button, right? So I selected everything with Control A, then press the number Control V to paste that, and let's run this. See what it likes, right? Still not doing employee extended. Left join employees extended employee name. All right, invalid object. Now, when you get error messages like this, you just double click and it'll take you to that part of the code right here, right? You can see a squiggly line. Multiply employees extended employee name could not be bound. Why not? Well, let's see. Normally because employee extended did not make it over in the conversion, right? That field. Let's see. That's from the orders table. So I'm gonna go to employee table. No, it's employees extended. So it looks like
it's a query.
It's a query. Thank you, George. All right. So we need to do a query. All right. Tip number 17, because I lost track of my tip numbers. But I'm going to go back to Access. I'm going to get employees extended. So this is a great example where you want to create a view, but the view is based on another one. So we're going to talk about the concept of CTEs. I'm going to come in here. This is employee extended. I'm going to right click to SQL View. I'll copy this. Go back to my desktop number 2. I'll press Control N, Control V, and we'll run this, make sure it's okay. Doesn't like the is no. Go back to my handy dandy website. Or anything, delete that, paste it there. Click on Convert. Got the announcement. Join Expo specific next month. Expo Latino, copy that. Come back here, Control A, delete that, paste it, and cross your fingers. Perfect. It worked. Okay, so how do we handle this? When I first started with SQL Server, I did what every root access developer does, right? I would create another view on employees extended, and then I would use that view with this other view. And that's fine. You can still do that, right? You can create as many views as you want. It's your database. The customer doesn't care, they care less. But there's some issues with it. Number one is, one of the hard way is, sometimes you create this view and you're like, oh, your employees extended. I use that everywhere, right? For example, you use that everywhere in the application. And oh yeah, we'll just create one view and then we'll use it everywhere. Yeah, it works until somebody comes along and changes that view, and now misses all the other views that it depends on, right? So I don't like that. I don't like to build these stack of house of cards where this view depends on that view. You can get carried away in Access where sometimes we create 5 or 6 queries in a chain, and the last one is what we bind to the report. So to avoid all that, I'm going to take this query. I'm going to create what's called a CTE, which is a common table expression. So I'm going to go my finger to the top. Now you see this messages here, it occupies half my screen. Press Control R to get rid of it. Right, so Control R is on Robert, gets rid of that. Okay. So I'm going to paste the query that we call employees extended, and I'm going to actually use, gosh, this is a terrible name. Let's see if I can get away with this. I'm going to copy this query here, and I'm going to say with, and to create CTE, you have to use the word with. employee extended as, then I do the open parenthesis, close parenthesis. Yeah. Okay. So CTE is nothing more than it's called common table expression, but think of it like an inline query, right? Now that I define what employees extended is, it's still giving me my thing here. So I'm going to check my syntax with the little check mark. You ever wonder what this parse? I can check this, parse it, and the order by clause invalid and views. Okay, so I got to get rid of that. So again, if I double click, I can get rid of this order by, which is not needed when we're using a CTE, because the CTE is a query. We don't care about the order, right? So I'll remove that. I want to check my parse again. And now these weren't working, right? Still got the squiggly line. Now, if you still got this squiggly line, I'm going to make a point here. Next, golden nugget. First one I executed. Then badge and employee extended. So it looks like it will not. Oh, I got two brackets up here. Let's see here. Let's do this again. All right, perfect. Now I run it. Okay, great. So this concept of CTE is learned several years ago. I love it, right? And I teach all my developers the first week how to create CTEs. Because it avoids the issue where you have multiple blows the database, you avoid blowing the database with views and so forth. Not that we don't use cascading views. Another thing I like about this is I can analyze the execution plan. Now, one thing you need to know is sometimes you have more than one query, right? You have a query that's based on 2 or 3 queries, so you would create multiple CTE. In this case, I don't need it, but if I had multiple CTEs, there's a golden nugget. I put a comma there, and then I don't have to do the width anymore. I'll just say, another CTE as, and then I'll put the other CTE in there, right? And then the last one doesn't need a comma. So I'm going to say select star from customers. Select star from customer. Do I need to do the width? Maybe I do need to do the width. I think I do need to do the width. No, let's see. No, I didn't. Okay. I want to check my parse here. Now notice I didn't use that second CTE, another CTE, right? But it's still there. So I don't use the width. So I can just add one CTE after the next without the comma. Otherwise, the last one, because we only need one, this is the part comma. All right. Now, sometimes you have to change table names, right? So if I were to go in here and I would say, okay, this is company, right? So I changed the table name company, customers. Okay, let's see, customers use, employees use. I'm gonna change employees. Let's say employee 2. I change my employees. I'm gonna say yes. If I change employees 2, and I come in here and I parse it, right? The parse went through, but when I execute it, see, it doesn't execute because I got the employees, right? So I double click. All right, so to resolve that issue is, you do Shift Control R whenever you add a field. What I meant to say about this example is, if you add a new table, this IntelliSense, right? This is IntelliSense that's giving you this issue. And you want to do is press Shift Control R to refresh your IntelliSense. So anytime you add a new table, this golden nugget number 24, you can just do that. All right, great. Now you're saying, okay, I created this. Now I need to link this back, create a view, right? So I'm gonna go back to the top of this here. I'm gonna say create view. And I usually like to use the same query name as in the front end when I'm querying this. So the query, then I'm gonna go back to my front end, and that's called employee extended invoice data. Excuse me, invoice data. So I'm gonna come back here. I'm gonna say create view. Take these spaces. Invoice data. As, right? So now I am going to see, I've never created a view with a space in there, so excuse me. Column names in each view function must be the column name, product, the view function. Invoice data is specified more than once. Column names. So I want to double click on this. By the way, I can select this right here and execute it right from here. Right? So doesn't like that execute. Let me figure out where this is what happens when I wing it for these sessions. Column names each view function must be the column name product ID. All right, so apply space ID. All right, I'm gonna do Control F. I just did Control F. And notice here in the upper right hand corner, this Control F shows up. All right, so I got two field names called product ID. All right, something that is a big name. So I'll just call this one number 2. And how did it, when they did this? Okay, I'm gonna create without the view. I'm gonna run the code without the view. So I'm gonna select everything but create view statements. Come down here, run this. And I want to see how product ID is handled right now. So if I come over here, what happens when I come over here to product ID? Let's see, product ID, what is here? See this? Now, access, as you guys know, will probably say product ID 1 and product ID 2, give it what's called a noise name. This did not happen. So I'm going to come in here. I'm just going to call this product ID 2. And this is going to cause problems because I need to go and change any query that has these two products here for some reason. And now I'm going to execute this and then create the view. So if I come in here in views, and if you don't see, there it is here. If you don't see it, just right click refresh. So if I right click and refresh to do this. Now I've got my invoice data view. Now that I've got my invoice data view, I can then link it back to my Access database. So let's do that. I'll go back to my front end. And I'm going to go external data in table manager. Right? And I've got this PSN connection here. And these are all the tables. And let me see if I can add it here. Add a new link. Data source name. The server. The source name DSN. I don't have a DSN. So I'm going to have to cancel this. Okay, so I'm just going to type DSN. Probably hear an error message. Yeah. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new DSN that's going to use where I use all this stuff. So I'm going to go to external data here. New data source from database from SQL Server. Import down one link. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and machine data source. I'm going to put view. You're logged in with a non-administrative system. DSN cannot be created or modified. All right. User data source. Okay, good. I'm going to come down here, and if I did not right, here it is. ODBC driver 17 for SQL Server. This is the latest driver, right? I'm going to use that one. I do remember the good old days of SQL Server Native Plan 11. Gosh, that takes me back. All right, I'm going to click on finish. So I'm just going to call it Northwind SQL Server Academy, SQL Server Academy 2. All right, the server is going to be my local server, so I click the drop down list. Now, I'm running this off my local PC. Look how long it's taking. So when you're on a network, it can take a lot longer, especially if not every SQL server is going to show up here if they don't, it's not advertising it. Some networks, they don't have a component of SQL Server that allows it to advertise to the world, hey, I'm here. So you would need to type in. Look how long it's taking in scanning my local home network here for SQL Server. So didn't find it, even found it. So I'm gonna go back to here and I'm gonna press Control N. I'm gonna say select. There's some special SQL Server T-SQL. I'm gonna say at. Let's start with at. I'm gonna call it server name. Server name. I'm gonna run this. Everything in SQL is a query. So it starts with select or some other function, right? So I'm gonna right click copy. Come back. So sometimes you don't know this here on server name, or you don't want to do it. You can just select add for server name. Paste that in there. Next. Integrate Windows Authentication. That's what I want. I want to default this to my Northwind database, and this is where you know when you have it right. See, it came up. So if you had the wrong server name, it wouldn't show up this list here. See how fast that was to show me that server. Let's say next, and I'm gonna say finish, and then test. Test list successfully. Click on OK. Click on OK. All right. So now I created my DSN, and now I'm gonna look for that view. Well, that view was called what? Invoice data. So I'm gonna come down to invoice data. Notice that stuff with DBO is what you're looking for. DBO means database owner. Here it is, invoice data. And normally we would use the invoice data with no spaces. That way, when you look at the list of stuff, the objects, so you only know that's a view. Right now, access things is just another table because that's what access speech views is, another table. You're gonna get this little dialog box because access wants to know, hey, is there a unique primary key on this table, which is really a view? I'm just going to hit OK, but I'd rather to wager maybe order ID is unique. And if you click on order ID and click OK, it's going to create an index on your access front end that's going to allow you to edit data in that view. So if you don't do it this way, you have to use it programmatically. You have to programmatically create index stuff. So if I click on order ID, it does it for me, right? It creates an index, and now I can do it. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to click on OK because I don't know order ID. Here it is. Now notice there's such a DBO underscore, right? Problem number 2. So I need to rename this. I'm going to rename this, get rid of the DBO underscore. And now any query, oh, I see I already have a query, so I have to rename the query. So I'm going to close this query. Okay. Close this query, rename the query. And now that. So I'm going to call it invoice data. Invoice. Invoice is this file. Invoice data. All right, there's my old query. So I'm going to rename the old query. So query old. And now I'm going to rename the new query view. And, you know, honestly, this is how I do that. We have a tool just for us. And I'll probably show you that tool next month so you can see how cool it is. Right, so remember all that work we went through last month? Well, we decided we would create a tool. We call it the Builder. And it does it all for us next month. So we want to make sure it's very neat technology where we use next database to create next database. All right, so I'm going to double click on this invoice data, and there it is. So that's all the work I did to create a view, right? Why did I create the view? The only reason I create a view is for performance issues. So if I have performance problems, I want to create the view, leverage the power of SQL Server, and that is what's going to make you a great Access with SQL Server consultant, specialist, or expert. Is you have to use that muscle, right? It's like being on the bicycle, using Access data, being on that bicycle, using SQL Server, being on a plane. I mean, that's the differences in terms of performance, reliability, and everything else. So you want to be that pilot in the air. You don't want to be the kid on the bicycle. And the way you do that is you leverage the power of views. And it's super critical when the data is in the cloud. Now, I worked with somebody in this call, which I will not name, and they had a server in another state. And I invited that person to this conference because and she's here, so I appreciate that. But you know, she has a SQL server in another state. So it's the same thing as Azure. When you have that server in Azure, whether you have it in Azure or another state, it's the same thing. It's in the cloud. If you got to go through that. Now, companies optimize their relationship, the links between headquarters and their remote facilities. Sometimes they have a dedicated switch and so forth. That doesn't mean it's going to be any faster than Azure because you still have a lot of traffic, right? You compete all the other traffic in that corporation. And if you have a company with thousands of employees, that's a lot of traffic going back and forth. So you got to learn these tips and tricks I'm showing you during this Academy series. You will leverage that. All right. So not something about. So here's the thing too. I had a discussion once with a person who didn't use views. They use passive queries, and we are going to cover passive queries here. But they use passive queries for everything. Never bothered once to create a view, and that works to a certain extent. It will work. I'm not saying it won't. It will work. But there's two issues with that. Number one is when you use a passive query, you're sending this query straight to SQL Server processing, which is great. And you're leveraging that SQL Server muscle, which is wonderful. But it's a ephemeral object. It gets executed on SQL Server and it disappears. With a view, however, you can actually save it to a database. And when you save a view like I did now, it'll save it with the execution plan. And that's my next nugget for you guys. So I'm going to press Control R here. And to view the execution plan for any query in SQL Server, so select the query. So I'm going to start with the employees query here. And this is the next nugget, Control L's and Larry. All right. And this is your execution plan now. It's a fairly simple query, and you hover over this and it gives you all these statistics, and it tells you about the cost and how much it costs, very little. for this, right? And other things. Now that's a simple query. So I'm going to select the other query, and I'm going to do the same thing. Control L. I got to select the whole thing because employees extend. So I'm going to do the whole thing. So I'm going to get rid of the first thing by double dash dash. It creates a comment. So it's like a single apostrophe. I'm going to press Control L. Okay. This is a lot more complex because now we're looking at CTE and then the main query and so forth. So it's just my point here is, ladies and gentlemen, is yes, you can do passive queries, but you want to go through the effort of saving these views. And when you save the queue, you stay with this execution plan. And what is the execution plan? It's an optimized plan to achieve the results of a query that you can fine tune. Now, I'll be the first one to admit I've never modified an execution plan in my life. I usually use the default because I'm dealing with Access database for crying out loud. It's not like they have a million records in the customer table, right? Because then they would have already had SQL Server, right? I'm an Access consultant. The reality is 99.99% of the time I'm dealing with hundreds of thousands of records. But when you're dealing with millions and millions of records, this execution plan here may not be enough. And so people who know with DBAs, database administrators, SQL Server developers better than me, will come in here and they'll tweak this execution plan. No, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. That's beyond the scope of this academy. But when you save this view, it stays with the execution plan. Now, what happens is, suppose you have an app with 25 users, and you have a query constantly throughout the application, right? We all have that application where we use the same query over and over again. We've all been there. SQL Server is so smart, especially the new version 2019. It'll remember that the query is being executed a lot, and it will save it in memory, right? And so a lot of times what will happen is, and I've seen this in real time, the application gets faster and faster the more people get on it, and the more time goes by. The SQL Server is analyzing and has these stats that it keeps that we can actually look at. If you're so inclined, you can actually look at the stats, say, wait a second, this query is being used all the time. Well, let me keep it in memory. So it just makes your application faster and faster. If you do this with a passive query, you may not, I'm not saying you won't, but you may not achieve the same results. Because, yeah, it might keep it in memory, but then it'll be ephemeral, and once it's done using it, it doesn't have any place to save it, right? It's just a passive query. Just like me coming here, pressing Control, and there's a Nancy, Control V, pasting my query, pressing that file to execute it. So the moral of the story is, if you want a hyper-fast, efficient application, great views. Use CTEs. Press Control L. Now, in this case, it did not recommend an index. One of the reasons why I do Control L is because it'll analyze and see if there's a missing index needed, right? And so if I have a customer who calls me up and says, Juan, this view, man, this query, this process is too slow. They won't say view query because they don't know. This process is too slow. And so let me say, let me do a Control L to look at it. And it's smart enough to say, hey, this query would benefit greatly if you add the index. So I'm gonna see if I can find a query that does that for next month and show you what I mean by that. But it's really imperative that you use Control L to analyze, to have SQL Server analyze like it does here. It'll actually tell you how to optimize your query review. Okay. So today we went over SQL Server migrations. Oh, I promised to do something for you, right? That is SQL Server. So we went to the beta, right? The customer gave my customer beta, and they reported all the bugs in Monday.com. And then 2 weeks later, I got beta candidate number 2. Again, I need to update the data. So how do I do that? All right. So say, for example, if I come here in customers, and I right-click, select top 1,000 rows, okay? And I'm going to say, I don't know, company A, right? I'm going to change the name to company A, right? So for whatever reason, they changed the company A, or they added new records since I last grabbed it back in. So I'm going to come in here to the Access front end. I'm going to go into customers. I'm trying to make a point here. So, and that either adding, well, no, the companies grow, right? They gave you a file a month ago, and there's a likelihood that they may have added a customer, maybe they may have updated the phone number. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to change this phone number. I'm going to say, okay, you know what? Now it's going to be 9999, right? Well, I did that with the SQL Server table. So of course, when I want the company A, so that's company P. If I go in here and I execute this query again and look at company P's record, just this one, it still says 0101. Why is not refreshing? I hate it when SQL Server makes me look bad. Why is it not refreshing? What am I missing? This right click and select step on top of 1,000 rows. Oh, did I not save the record? Yeah, I saved the record. It's not editing. All right. So I'm going to go into, well, I rename these tables, but if I go in here and I added a customer, right? So I'm going to go to customers. I'm sure these tables are going to work. Customer's logo. And I'm going to come in here, company P, right? And update that phone number, 9999. It's only updated to the local access backend. So usually what will happen is I have a new beta candidate. I say, okay, give me the latest backend so I can update the data in the cloud or in your local SQL Server. And then I launch SQL Server Migration System, which I'm going to do next. So I'm going to launch SQL Server Migration Assistant for Access. I'm going to load my prior project, recent projects, and then put it in there, the table. My numbers, my data table here, right? Now I'll probably have to map these. Oh, look, it still says customers and all that, so may or may not work. So these are link tables, by the way. So it's not going to work. But here's what I would do. I simply go here and I would migrate the data. So I click on migrate data and it updates it. It deletes all the data from SQL Server. This used before SQL Server migration system. I'm old enough to know when we did this manually. It deletes all the data from every table and then it imports all the data one more time. So this literally takes seconds to update the SQL Server database when you back in. If this is a big if, you didn't modify the database to begin with. Remember how we had that attachment data type field? If you did that and then migrated, you would have to again work with their backend, remove that attachment data field, and they'll be ready to do this migrate data. So it's a wonderful way to give fresh data to your client. All right, so before we wrap up, I'm going to open it up for questions here. So why don't you go ahead and unmute your microphone. If you have any questions for me, let me see. Dale. Dale down. My mic is not functioning, George. Okay, thank you, George, for the URL. Does anybody have any question about what we did? I like to appreciate you guys showing up, by the way. It's not easy to do that. I had to rush eat dinner so I can be ready for this. Did you guys like the content? Let me know in the comments. Did you like the content? Did you learn anything? Any nuggets that you was Sasado? Thank you for being here, by the way. Sasado is in the Philippines right now. What time
Thank
is
you
it
as
in
well.
the Philippines?
It's 8:30 a.m.
8:30 a.m. I know you worked all night to be with us. I appreciate you being here for me. I appreciate that. It works for me, by the way, Sasado.
Thank you.
Well, always here, even though it's 3 in the morning in Germany. We have an international audience, so appreciate that. Awesome. All right, so let's look at questions.
It's 2:30 in the morning.
2:30 in the morning. Thank you so much, Klaus. You've always been there for me. Appreciate you coming to these meetings. All right, good. So here's what you need to do, the homework, right? This recording will be up and running on the web here soon. I'll advertise it once George has uploaded it. And then what I want you to do is I want you to do the same things I've done, right? Because the only way you're going to learn is to replicate these, right? Create a Northland file, do SQL Server Migration Assistant, migrate the data. Your homework is to do all of this and repeat these steps if you've never done it. This is a great way of doing this. And let me tell you, this looks great on a resume. The fact that you're adding these skill sets, being able to optimize Access SQL Server, I would dare say that it's less than 10% of the worldwide population of Access developers who know how to optimize Access SQL Server. And I tell you, sometimes I interview a candidate, they'll have job opening. And I remember once I interviewed a candidate and I asked him, "Well, do you use SQL Server?" "Oh yeah, I use SQL Server, man, great." This is all good. And you use views? "Oh no, I don't bother with views." Well, what do you do with SQL Server? Oh, I just make tables and do everything in Access. Well, that's not really optimizing Access SQL Server. Number one. Number two, I can tell he's never done a cloud project because that would not work with cloud. So this is some really good skill sets. All right, Shauna, thank you for joining us. Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you so much. So we will be back here in November. Let me just give you the date. You can mark it down the calendars. And the second Tuesday of the month. November 9th, we're going to talk a lot more about SQL Server migration assistance. Thank you, Robert. So long, everyone. Have a great night. Talk to you next month. With some music.
Take care. Happy Halloween.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. So long from Chicago.